Alright, looks like we're live. Hope you're having a nice day. Thanks for checking out this video. Just getting a couple of things set up here and then I'll switch our screens over. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we're doing today. I have some exciting information here. So I last night decided to test out another setup with my phone's camera. I didn't realize that I could create two video inputs in my streaming software with the same device. And now I'm able to basically show you my painting, and for now at least I'm able to show a second video of my palette. And the challenge or the tricky part about this is that I can only put my phone in one place, and it's hard to find a vantage point that will provide a good view of both of these things. So I'm hoping, at least for tonight, that this is going to be effective. I've been saying in the last couple of live streams that, I'm tempted to try to maybe invest in a second camera, or at least like a webcam that will be able to connect to my Mac Mini like my phone can, and then maybe I could get a better close-up view of my palette. But actually for now this seems pretty good. You can see the layout of my materials here, actually let me make this a little bigger since I have the space. I think this is going to work pretty well. And I'm going to turn down the music just a little bit. My copyright-free music that I'm streaming here. But anyway, I'm excited to see how well this is going to work. So this is the next painting that I'm creating for my illustration portfolio. For those of you who have not been keeping up with my YouTube channel, or if you missed some of my other social media posts, I've been a big fan of the trading card game Magic: The Gathering for about 10 years now, and I've always really loved the artwork behind the cards. And when I first started to play the game, about a year into playing the game, I decided to submit a few digital paintings to their freelance pool application process. I never heard anything, which was a good thing, I think, and at the time, and ended up going to grad school, and then things sort of snowballed and happened from there in terms of the plein air stuff and other studio work. And I kind of just sort of forgot about applying to Wizards of the Coast with another portfolio submission. And then about a month ago, I noticed that they were going to be opening their application portal for about a month and a half, starting in February. And so I started designing some compositional sketches and decided, if I'm going to apply again, I want to take this really seriously and see if I can, kind of get that door open, or find some opportunities to share my work with the game. And whether or not it works out this year, I think I'll keep applying and just keep trying and see what happens. But this is the second physical painting that I'm making as part of my portfolio. At this point, I'm shooting to submit 4 finished designs. At least 2 of the 4 will be oil paintings, physical paintings, and then right now I have 1 pretty much finished digital painting, And you know, if I was ever to illustrate artwork for the game, I think I would rather make an oil painting as opposed to just doing a digital illustration. So I think I'm going to try to get 3 oil paintings finished for my portfolio. So in the last painting that I also live streamed, I just kind of jumped right into the painting process in this same order of operations. So I made a drawing with graphite on paper, and then I sealed the drawing and glued it to a piece of plywood, and then primed it with a few coats of matte medium, which is a translucent acrylic binder that seals the paper and allows me to paint with oils right on top of my drawing without losing my drawing, which is a process I love. I've done this a bunch of times. It's been a while since I've worked this way, but with this, like, you know, heavily drawn concept and this illustration type of work, it makes a lot of sense to use this method of painting. But like I said, in the last oil painting I made, I just jumped right into the color palette. I didn't really do a lot of research or planning with the colors that I chose to use. Without making you go to my channel and find the other live stream, I'll go ahead and just share really quickly here. This is the other painting that I made, and it's pretty much done. But the thing that I'm looking at now is that, you know, I kind of wish maybe I would have done a little bit more planning or preparation for the color palette, because though it is really intense and dramatic, which is something that I wanted, it's very chromatic, and you know, it's a bit too saturated, I think, in some areas. So for this next painting, I really want to try and keep things a little bit more neutral in the palette. And what I did prior to starting the live stream today, I decided, why don't I go look for a few cards that I really like and use the artwork as inspiration for my color palette. So I have this folder with a few cards that I grabbed just like right before starting the live stream today. And I don't think I own any of these cards, but I was initially looking up cards that were plains cards, or like the like white color in Magic. And, you know, I kind of was already imagining like this could work well as a white card that has a pretty bright palette. I think in the last live stream, at the very end of the live stream, I was sharing what I was thinking about the palette, and you know, I want this to feel like a very midday scene with the sun still really high in the sky, so creating kind of a washed out effect. And then, you know, looking at white and black cards, I eventually just came across this card called Endurance that was illustrated by Campbell White, it looks like. But I love the sense of scale and atmospheric perspective in this painting. And that's something that I think I'll try to really push in my painting that I'm starting today. Here's another one I really liked a lot. This is, again, a white and black colored card, because I could see this, you know, this design working with the themes of those colors in Magic. So I'm already starting to think about, like, what are some examples of multicolor cards that are both white and black that have, you know, a more varied palette in terms of hues, but are still somewhat like rich in their achromatic, muted colors. So this is an illustration that I really like a lot too. This is by Igor Kiriluk. I'm probably butchering that name, but I love the sense of scale in this. I like how much space is given to the sky and the environment. Like, it's a very low horizon, which is way lower than the horizon that I have in my design and for this painting, but there's certainly some, you know, overlaps in terms of scale and the composition. So I really like how earthy and muted and gray this color palette is. Here's another similar kind of card illustrated by Ryan Barger, it looks like. I like the greenness of, almost a monochromatic palette, but I like that there's these orange and yellow bursts of really chromatic, intense color in a few different zones, where the majority of the painting is, again, fairly neutral, but this one has a green kind of base in terms of all of the colors that I'm seeing in this illustration. Really, really cool. Also really digging the compression of contrast between this figure and the clouds in the background. So, I could imagine maybe in my, in this area of my illustration, maybe there's a similar level of compression so that it feels like it's really high up in the sky and really far away. Here's a bat illustration that I like. This is by Warren Mahey, I think. I really like this painting because it's kind of graphic, and there's a lot of big, simple shapes that allow the areas of contrast to really show through. I don't know if that's something that I will take influence from for my painting today, but again, the color palette here is really rich, and I like the kind of aqua, blue, green background. So I brought this in just kind of to show a more low-key painting and how intense those color relationships can be, even though the majority of this is on the lower end of the value scale. This one I really liked the background in this illustration, especially, again, because it's fairly neutral, but there's a haziness that I think is really interesting in this illustration. So that was the main reason for this. I'm also paying attention to things like the landscape compared to the sky. If things are backlit, how can the value relationships work together to help create this misty atmospheric perspective. A couple of these files that I downloaded really quickly were not very high quality, so I apologize for the blurriness in some of these. I have to figure out better ways to share these artworks. Actually, I forgot to mention, this is by G. Host Lee, this illustration. This one is by Vincent, I can't even read the last name there. I feel bad. I don't know if it's Price or Prince or something like that. Forsaken Sanctuary is this card. And I think the reason I saved this one was because it had these really subtle purpley red areas around the warm highlights, which I thought was interesting. I could see a similar sort of palette with the warmth and a cooler red, like an alizarin, grayish alizarin color, working well with like a yellow ochre. I liked this illustration by Karl Kopinski, mostly for this just like, again, sense of scale, sense of simplifying information that's really far away from the viewer. So a lot of this is just like helpful reminders in showing scale and distance, and how to really draw the eye while not losing this sort of meaningful depiction of information, which is that, hey, this is a very large subject or object that has a very like looming, overhanging kind of presence in the illustration. And again, the color palette here, a lot of neutral, very rich yet soft grays throughout this painting. So I'm gonna definitely keep some of this in mind in terms of my muted palette of colors. This is by Yi Wei, I think, or Yi Wei. Again, I feel bad if I'm really butchering these names. This is another one where it's like, mostly neutral, kind of cool gray color palette with a few very bright, warm notes, and that those areas really pop, in a primarily neutral and cool neutral palette. So I could see that also maybe working well in the design that I have. This is by Noah Bradley. I liked the left side of this illustration, just that sense of distant landscape, again, scale, compressing values, the glowing sense of light, and just that it's a great example of contrast, right? The foreground here is super intense and super dark compared to the left side of the painting. So it's a nice reminder of, like, you know, if you want to show something that's far away, it would help to show a big drastic value shift in the foreground. I think this is the last one that I saved. This is by Andreas Zafiritos. Andreas Zafiritos, I think. And, you know, again, this is a lot like a couple of the other ones I showed, where it has a fairly neutral color scheme with, you know, these really sharp contrasts in value. And I think the nice thing about going through and collecting examples like this is that it helps me to view the palette that I'll be working with some of these examples of contrast in mind. You know, I don't really want to paint in the way that these artists are painting. It's mostly just like, how can artwork that's at this scale read in terms of space and atmosphere and scale of the subject, you know, when it's shrunk down to this really small handheld piece of artwork. And still thinking about distance and contrast and those things. So I picked two of the paintings here that I really liked. And the first one was Endurance. That was the first painting I, you know, brought into the folder and talked about. Even though it's not a white and black card, I like that glowing sense of color and temperature in the sky. And again, that sense of atmospheric perspective. Like, you know, you're looking up at something that's very, very tall, you know, almost like a skyscraper type of height. And seeing the color shifting and that backlit glowing sensation as well. So in this, the sun is a lot lower than where my sun would be, so I don't know if, you know, some of that glowing, I don't know how well that would work in my design, but what I did is on Photoshop, I just, with the color picker tool, clicked a few areas of the illustrations and then just made little color notes to create like a color library as a starting point for my painting today. And then the second painting I picked was this God of Passage creature here. That was the pretty green and yellow orange painting. You know, when we see both of them, you know, one on top of the other like this, there's not like a huge overlap in terms of the palette when I look at the cards. But then when I look to the left side of my image here, there are quite a few colors that feel pretty close. Like this orange and this orange aren't that far apart. I feel like this color and this orange aren't that far apart from one another. So there's quite a bit of harmony happening there. These two greens are almost the exact same green at first glance. This kind of bluish green gray up here is very similar to these two colors down at the bottom. So this is one of the things I think that can really help when you're trying to understand what you like about someone else's work and really objectively studying their decisions in terms of their palette as a starting point for your own work. I don't do this very often with other paintings I make, but I feel like, you know, after the last painting I made that was very intuitive and didn't have a roadmap, I wasn't looking back at other artists' work as inspiration or any kind of reference for color palettes. This is going to be a really useful step in the process today. So I'm going to leave this image up on my computer, and I'll take down the file on the stream. But yeah, so what I'm going to start with is here on my palette with a palette knife. I'm going to look over at my computer and periodically use that as a reference for the colors that I'll be starting with. So I'm going to grab a little bit of burnt umber, and this is going to help me get a few of those darker, warm colors that we saw. And this is a little bit of Portland warm gray. So actually, while I'm mixing colors, I can run through my color palette, which is also listed on my website in case you're a painter and you're curious about the colors that I like to keep on my palette. This is my plein air painting palette, but I also use it a lot in my studio, obviously. And this is set up in a way that's pretty consistent for me. So I have off camera here, below my white, I have a little pile of my medium, which is a gel, linseed oil based medium called oleo gel. And then I have titanium white, cadmium green, cadmium yellow light or lemon. I think this is light, cadmium yellow medium, yellow ochre, cadmium orange. So I already have 4 cadmium colors so far, because they're just so powerful and high in tinting strength. And with my paper towel hand, I like to wear gloves. Usually I wear 2 gloves, but because I'll be, pretty close to my microphone painting, that squeaky, glove sound is pretty annoying. So I'm just going to use the glove on the left hand. After my cadmium orange, I have burnt sienna here. This is cadmium red light. Sometimes I'll use a cadmium red deep. This is alizarin permanent. It's a lot like alizarin crimson, but it's a more light, fast, and archival pigment that they substitute for traditional alizarin. This is burnt umber. This is raw umber. Sometimes I'll have other pre-mixed grays in these areas, but the 2 grays that I'm using are from a tube that I buy from Gamblin. This is Portland warm gray, and this is Portland cool gray in the corner over here. And then I have ultramarine blue. I don't typically use these blues, but it would be cobalt blue, cerulean blue, and then phthalo blue is a blue that I actually will use. And sometimes I have Prussian blue on my palette. Don't use that color very often these days anymore. And when I do, usually I'll just put it down in my mixing area, because it's only being used in one painting most often, so I don't usually keep it on my palette. But these 2 blues I typically always have on my palette. And then I have phthalo green over here. This was a little pile of dioxazine purple, which sometimes I'll use, but I don't have any wet dioxazine purple here at the moment. So hopefully that helps. If you're going to keep watching while I paint along, you can have a bit more context and insight into how I'm creating my colors here. So far I just took a little bit of burnt umber and Portland warm gray to create this slightly lighter brown. I'm going to grab a little bit of my raw umber and mix that in here too. This seems a little light compared to what I'm looking at on my computer for those color swatches. Man, it is cold in Wisconsin today. If you live in Wisconsin, then you're definitely just hibernating indoors right now. Let me see. I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow ochre and a touch of burnt sienna. Both of these colors are pretty strong in tinting strength, so I'm just grabbing a little bit of burnt sienna to make this slightly warmer. And let's grab some cadmium orange. I don't know how far I'm going to get in this painting today. I think with the setup that I have with the 2 camera angles, this stream will be probably geared towards just talking about how I'm going to go about thinking about relationships of color in the painting, and from a conceptual standpoint and a formal standpoint, like because I don't have a reference image that is like a full color version of this idea, everything I'm going to be painting is just like off the cuff, like intuitive and very open-ended, kind of like the last illustration painting that I made. But here we at least have a very limited range of hues that I have already pulled aside, and will try my best to kind of stay within. As I use up these piles of paint, I will probably just be dipping back into my larger primary colors here, my main palette of colors, but the intent is to get back to what I'll be looking at in terms of those colors I shared earlier. So I'm trying to get at least one or two of my greens that I had. So I'm using ultramarine blue, cadmium green. The cadmium green is a really nice color for tinting up my darker blues and greens without losing some of the chroma, which is a technique that it took me a long time to kind of realize how helpful that is. Instead of just constantly grabbing white to tint things up, my paintings would just look really chalky and would lose a lot of their rich intensity of color. So actually, maybe while I'm mixing still, I'm going to enlarge my palette for us just momentarily here. So it's easier to see the colors I'm mixing. Let's grab a darker neutral. So this is just ultramarine blue, burnt umber. Some people will mix a gray like this with those two colors pretty routinely as a substitute for Payne's gray, which if you're new to painting, I highly encourage making your own neutral and then thinking about value relationships and using burnt umber or maybe even burnt sienna and ultramarine blue as your like temperature extremes, and then you can think about how temperature also creates volume and depth and space and all that good stuff. Let's grab some Portland Cool. There's some dried out bits in this paint, but I don't really care at this point. We're going to grab a little bit of our yellow ochre, make this into more of a green. I'm looking at one of those colors that I showed that's kind of a neutral, darker green. Maybe we'll grab some raw umber just to bring the value down slightly. Okay, and then let's see. I need a few of the brighter colors still, so I'm going to grab some white, a little bit of cadmium red light. There's a bright peachy kind of orange color that I pulled out from one of those example paintings. That seems a little too bright still. Maybe we'll grab some burnt sienna. Maybe a little bit more burnt sienna. And then I'm going to look back one more time and see, like, is there one unique color on screen that I don't currently have? Because a lot of these are very similar to two or maybe even three of the colors that I had picked out from those illustrations. Let me see. I wonder if I could even just show you real quick here what we're looking at. So hopefully you can kind of see a few of the colors that I was looking at and that I'm trying to mix up as a side-by-side here. I think what I could probably do is at least mix up one of those bright, like almost like butter milk off-white colors that are at the top of that color grouping there, and that way at least I have some range in value. That olivey green color that's over here, this I don't have mixed up anywhere, so I might try to mix this up as well. So this color and this, it might not even be that visible on your screen, but there's this like off-white kind of yellowish color that I'm going to also mix up. So let's grab some titanium white, maybe a little bit of yellow ochre, and see what this looks like. Okay, that's a little too orange, so I'm going to grab maybe a little bit of my cadmium yellow light. That looks pretty good. And then that olivey, kind of olive green color. Let's see if we can get that real quick. I'm going to start with cadmium green and a little bit of yellow ochre. Yellow ochre seems to be one of the main colors that I'm putting into a lot of these mixes, and that's probably the biggest thing that I'm going to pay attention to right now, is in case I use up all of this paint, or as I continue to work on this painting in multiple sessions, if I forget how I made some of these colors, the one color I need to remember is yellow ochre, because if it's already in more than half of these mixtures, any future color that I put into my painting that also has yellow ochre is going to be, it might be subtle, but it's going to be harmonious still in the painting. So that's the thing to really keep in mind if you're doing anything like this. Because otherwise, if you're thinking, well, I'm gonna just remix all of these colors the next time I have to paint, if you don't like write down what you're using to make those mixtures, it might be really difficult, depending on your palette and which colors you're grabbing to make your painting. And when I teach, I typically will talk a lot about limiting the palette of our colors, especially if you're trying to practice something that's not super centered on color in your painting process. And the reason for that, the reason that I encourage students to, really focus on limiting the palette, is because then it helps to simplify that like guessing game of knowing where your color mixture came from, and at the same time it helps to create a little bit of a quicker harmony throughout your painting. Because again, if you only started with 3 colors, for example, if we started with ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, and let's say burnt sienna, if all of this was made with just these 3 and maybe a little bit of white, the painting is going to be a lot more harmonious than if I grabbed cadmium green and mixed up something with cadmium green and then put that in the painting later on in the process, right? Especially if this cadmium green color was mostly the green and not, yellow ochre or ultramarine blue or the burnt sienna. So it's really comes down to this idea of ratios between our pigments and our colors, and the amount of diversity that we have on our palette is just a lot more to try to bring together and create unity with in the process, right? So if you're new to painting, that's something I encourage students to really think about. It's like, if you're trying to practice drawing or getting, believable value relationships or things like that, simplify a different part of the process. That way you can really focus on, subtle value shifts or maybe temperature shifts. And then you don't have to also be trying to juggle a palette of 9 or 12 colors. Okay, so now that we have kind of a nice starting arrangement of colors here, I'm going to try to scumble in with very thin paint and a little bit of my medium. I'm not using any solvent in my painting because number one, it's pretty toxic, and number two, you don't really need it depending on the effects that you want to have. It also makes the paint a little bit more unstable. And typically if I was going to use it, I would use it in this first layer of doing a wash. But because it's winter and I don't want to open any windows or try to worry about venting my studio, I'm just going to avoid solvent altogether. So I'm grabbing a little bit of yellow ochre and some of my bright value that I mixed up here. And, you know, as I was talking a few minutes ago about yellow ochre being this like what we could call like a mother color to the painting, right? It's like the most dominant pigment throughout all of these mixtures. That's a pretty safe color to use as like a block-in color, right? To sort of tone the surface and you know, create a foundation to the painting that is going to be used as like the foundation and this context for connecting all of the other colors that I'll be painting with. I'm going to turn my music up again here. So even though, like, you know, the values might be a little bit off, that's not really a concern right now because I mostly want to just try to think about areas of temperature, contrast, and how much variety I want my painting to have. Right? Those are kind of the main things that I'm going to be thinking about. Grab a little bit more medium, some more paint. I'm also mixing in an area of my palette that's tapping a little bit into this pink peachy color that's over here on this part of the palette as well. So there's a little bit of a warmness that's also coming through because of that. Sometimes what I'll do if I'm working over a drawing that's been sealed with matte medium like this is do a toning layer with acrylic as opposed to oil paint. And you know, because I'm using acrylic, then I could really thin it out and do more of a wash and play around with texture and drips and, like, you know, more of a noisy atmospheric type of application. But we're going to be making this whole painting with oils, so I'm not going to worry about that here. But you can see where, you know, when I paint right over the drawing that's been sealed, I still have access to the line work that I spent like 2 hours drawing and maybe 3 hours drawing. And that's going to save me a lot of time later on, as opposed to starting a painting, you know, that's like just looking at my drawing. It's really difficult for me to get the same, you know, accuracy of detail or, you know, get back into the amount of information that I'm able to resolve in the drawing. You know, because working with graphite, I'm able to start to get some of the tonal relationships, right? The value relationships through light and dark. I'm able to start to make sense of the texture of some of my subject, where things are softer in the edges or harder in the edges. A lot of that I can start to determine and figure out just with pencil on paper. And so if you're able to just start painting right over the drawing, then you can start to like shift gears and think about temperature and think about, color, transparency, and, chroma, colors that are really pure and intense versus muted and neutralized. So this is it's a really fun way of painting if you like to draw. And because I'm working with oils, I can always go in with a paper towel and pull off some of the paint to start to resolve other value relationships in the painting. Like once I get this layer in, I'm going to start to think about where my brightest brights in terms of value and my darkest darks are going to be, and then I can start to shift and move things around if I need to. I know this angle isn't really the best vantage point for painting, but as I mentioned earlier, I think this is the best position to be able to show my palette and my painting with one device. So it's nice that an iPhone can allow you to stream from one device like this and show two different angles with their desktop view that they have. It was a pretty cool realization last night to discover that. The other nice thing about doing a base layer over the whole painting like this is that it really helps me to start to imagine the tone of the image, right? Do I want it to feel kind of scary? Do I want it to feel mysterious or uplifting or positive or optimistic? All of those descriptors can start to play more of a role at this early stage of the painting process. Just by thinking about depth and space and distance and those things, I can start to imagine how do I want to make the foreground feel close and the background feel really far away. And if you're familiar with my plein air paintings, then you've probably seen examples of where I've experimented with some of those relationships in terms of chroma and temperature and value. And all of that experience that I've gained through painting outdoors is going to come in handy when I'm working on stuff like this that's from imagination. So whether or not you're someone who enjoys painting, illustrative work or figurative work, I think it's definitely beneficial to do some plein air painting every once in a while and really start to notice the way that natural lighting conditions describe and reveal information. Okay, so I've got my main layer down and I can start to think about some of these zones of intensity and separation, so the focal point of this painting, I think I want to be drawing the viewer's eye towards is probably like this area here. This to me seems like a pretty interesting moment in the design where there's this like tornado like shape that is meeting the ground, and that's where a lot of the force is being pulled towards. So naturally the angle of a lot of these shapes is going to lead our eye towards this area of the horizon line. And I think I was considering doing a cloud or a few clouds in the sky, right above the horizon. And the angle of some of those clouds might also help to sort of point us to this area in the painting. Now that I'm thinking about that, or now that I'm like, okay, open to the idea, or I like that idea, what I can start to do is consider the color relationships in this area. And it's like, how do I want to either enhance that effect of being drawn to this part of the painting through contrast, or how do I want to minimize that intensity of like moving the viewer's eye to this area, right? So I could either compress some of the contrasts, or maybe make some of the leaps and the jumps from like temperature or chroma a lot less dramatic. That's one idea for like quieting things down, because I don't want this to be the main thing where you just keep coming back to this moment. I really like the top part of this creature, subject design here. It's like this weird atmospheric cloud kind of creature thing, this sort of being. And I like the softness of edge and the way that there's this sort of misty steam kind of effect happening at the top of the body of this creature. So this is something I also want to really draw the viewer's attention to. So these two zones, I think, are going to need a bit more contrast to be emphasized, right? And this is what we talk about when we're studying composition and we're studying color theory, is this idea of hierarchy, right? So it's like when we tell a story to someone and there's like a climax in the story, that detail is a very important part of the whole story, right? So a visual story is going to have levels of importance as well, right? So obviously I spent the time imagining the landscape, imagining these different shapes of trees, the mountains, this cliff with this like larger tree in the foreground. It's not that the other corners of the design are not important, but I don't want to do anything that's too similar in the character of what's being described, right, in those areas that I'll be doing here and here. So at this early step of the process, I need to be kind of already thinking about the way that these different areas of the image relate to one another, if they're similar or different. So I think before I get into like chroma or temperature, I want to think a little bit more about value first, right? The lights and the darks in the painting. I think that's going to be a little bit more important at this point. So I'm going to grab a clean paper towel here and make a smaller piece so that I can roll it up and fold it into more of a point to create essentially like an eraser tool. And this is going to help me lighten up and pull off some of that oil paint that I just put down. So right off the bat, I know I want my sun in the sky to be one of the brightest moments in the whole painting, if not the brightest moment in the whole painting. So I can start to think about the values of the sky compared to the sun, and I could maybe even do like a I don't know what you'd call this, but like a diffused edge to the sun in this area, and something a little bit more shape oriented and design oriented. That's kind of interesting. The nice thing about working this way too is that I can always grab my brush and change something, right, or adjust something, which maybe that's what I will do here. It's like I kind of like if it comes up to a point at the top. That feels interesting. Okay, and the other area that I'm already sort of considering creating a bit more highlights is down here near the like chaotic moment of the tornado, right? So if I lighten up a lot of the values here, that should help also draw the viewer's eye to that lower part of the painting. And maybe even around the base of the tornado could be lightened up slightly. Now, this is a lot like doing a grisaille tonal base layer in oil painting. Some artists will do this in like a burnt sienna color. Some artists will do this in a grayscale, achromatic, value study. I think it helps to work with some kind of chroma most of the time, but it also depends on your schedule, because I think if we're working with an achromatic palette and you want your painting to be chromatic by the end, like, you're going to have to glaze on top of all of those values. And honestly, that's kind of the purpose of making the drawing, right, is to give me that roadmap of the values and the shapes. And I'm already in that glazing part of the process right now, where I can still see my drawing and I can play with the amount of paint that's on the surface. Now, yellow ochre is not I don't believe that it's a transparent color. I think it's an opaque color. So what I could have done is picked a more transparent or semi-transparent color to do this in, and that probably would have opened up a little bit more range in terms of the value varieties, but I'm not too worried about that right now. Okay, so already I think this is going to be a good route to take. Like, I like how bright this ground plane is here in the middle. If I fold this a few more times, I can get a clean area of the paper towel again. What I'll probably do down at the horizon here in the sky is make this a cooler color. And this is sometimes what I'll do if I'm working in plein air, like if I'm starting out with an interpretive color palette, which is what we could call this right now, right? It's not like I'm looking at a subject in real life and trying to match the exact colors that it appears to have, which I paint like that when I'm working in outdoors sometimes anyways, but it's also fun to work with, to start with the palette and then start looking at your subject. And what you can do then is, really think about the context of things like temperature in this limited palette. So, when I look at this right now, and if I was supposed to pick out the coolest looking color in terms of temperature, right, like blues and cool colors, I'd probably have to go with one of these three, right? None of them are like super, super cold in their temperature, but relative to the rest of this limited palette, these are the coolest, pigments or mixtures of pigment that I have access to. Obviously, we're not looking at the boundary or the edge of my normal palette here because we're trying to create a harmonious painting. Now you can flip that and think about the warmest part of the palette as well, right? So then I would pick either this orange or maybe even this green. Like, those are the two, I would say, most vibrant, warm, chromatic colors that are on the palette right now. Everything else is sort of more neutral or closer to neutral, which is how I feel about some of these other cool tones as well. Like, nothing is super extreme. Now, the nice thing about this is that I could work on my painting and get to a point where I go, well, I don't have anything quite blue enough. Now I know how much blue that I want to put into my new palette of colors, or which type of blue I want to use, and how much I want to use it in the painting, if that makes sense, right? So by limiting the palette, this again comes back to teaching and the benefits of limiting a palette, is that it allows us to have some informed context for the painting that we're working on, and we can go, well, that color, this bluish gray, is not blue enough, right? So that doesn't mean I'm going to mix up an entirely new blue. It just means that I'm going to make some slight adjustments to this gray on my palette to make it closer to a blue that I need in the painting, right? So this is where If you're new to oil painting or any kind of painting, I think that's the realization that I had after, I don't remember when, but at some point it was like, okay, it's really just about the relationships of this, right? This is all that really matters right now, and where I decide to place those. The other thing I was going to say is, if you're painting from observation and you want to work with a limited palette, what I'll do in plein air is go, okay, if the sky is my bluest or my coolest color, my most chromatic and my coolest, bluish color or hue, and this is my palette, I need to figure out which of these is going to give me the brightest, most vivid, cool color. And what I could do is grab a little bit of white and tint some of this gray up slightly. And what we might realize is actually this dark kind of bluish gray might be the best blue on the palette, right? I think you can barely see that area I just mixed up, but if I'm working in plein air, I might go, well, this is a pretty cool color, especially if I put it next to a really warm color, right? Or this one over here could look very blue compared to some of these warmer pigments in this limited palette. So I'm saying all of this because I've already started thinking, well, at some point, if I paint the sky a cooler color in some area, which I don't know if I'm going to do that, because one of the things I liked about some of the examples that I pulled up and showed at the start of the live stream tonight is that a lot of them have a fairly limited, muted color palette. Nothing is really overtly chromatic. And I think that's the thing I need to remember right now at this early part of my process, is to not get too chromatic and too vivid or saturated too early. So I think what I'm going to do is grab some of my grayish, kind of cool gray from over here, and start to work that into the sky. Now, the other thing I need to figure out is because, this subject, this creature, being, object, subject thing, it's not really based on anything. It's not based on an animal or a creature or a character from some other thing. It's just this abstract shape that I like. And, what's fun about drawing and painting like this is that it gives me a total freedom to decide what the characteristics are going to look like, especially at this point thinking about the color, right? So it's if I want this to be a focal area, I need to figure out what the color of this, what we would call the local color of this object is going to be, and what I want to do in the sky, right? Do I want to make the sky really cool in temperature? Do I want to keep it very warm in temperature? I kind of like this monochromatic, space right now. So it could be interesting if I kept the sky more of a hot sort of desert heat type of sensation, and then maybe keeping this slightly cooler in temperature, that would pop really well against a very warm sky, right? So I'm thinking about the relationship of those two things. So that's what I have to sort of start to decide and commit to, or at least make some kind of attempt or hypothesis, and then decide if it's working or not. So I think what I might do is just leave the sky how it is and start to work into this creature, and then see what happens. So I'm going to grab some of this gray here and a little bit of this brown that I mixed up. Now, I love the drawing that I have in this, and I don't want to paint entirely over that and lose a lot of that line work. So I'm going to try to keep this really, really thin. Maybe we'll start, oh, it's pretty dark. Let's grab a little bit of this. So I'm going to try to fight the urge of wanting to reach into my titanium white and just use this butter yellow color instead. Because if I can keep using this as my tinting color, that's going to also create a lot of harmony in the painting, right? That's pretty opaque. Let's just put a few dabs of paint down, and then I can kind of go through and blend this around. Hopefully it'll be pretty transparent and still see some of that line work. It looks kind of weird right now. It's got this like spotted leopard, kind of feeling. It's amazing what you can do with oil paint and like how little paint you need to create really rich effects, especially if you're using artist grade oil paint, where like as you thin it out, it maintains a lot of its vibrancy. That might be one of the challenges that people might be having if you're working in oils and you're being pretty conservative with the paint. Maybe part of the reason is because of investing in the paint can be expensive, and we don't want to use it all right away, which is it's a great reason to not use a lot of paint. But you might also intentionally be wanting to use less paint to do effects like this. And if you're working with a student grade paint, sometimes there's so much of the binder and the oil, like different oils that are in the paint, that the amount of pigment that you actually have access to is a lot lower than what you would get out of an artist grade tube of paint. So some of your favorite artists might work with really thin layers like this, and when we try to do it, if we're not using a similar level of quality in our paint, it could be really confusing and frustrating, because it's like I'm doing exactly what they're doing, but my painting is really dull and I don't have this like beautiful rich kind of even surface. So if that sounds familiar, that could be part of the problem you might be running into. All right, so we got kind of like a peachy gray sort of local color on this. When I say local color, what I mean is, if we're seeing this form without any kind of extreme temperature shift in the light source, like if this was a real creature and we were looking at it under a red infrared type of light bulb, it would look a lot more red, right? And it's like, okay, to paint that illustration, it would have to look really red, but that doesn't mean that we're looking at the local color of the creature or the object, because we're seeing it affected by the temperature of the light source. So right now I'm mostly concerned about trying to figure out, well, what is this thing? What is this object or creature? And what does it look like with pretty like standard, light on it? And then I can always glaze over it and make some of these like environmental color shifts with things like bounce light. Like if the landscape was really green, I might want to put a little bit of green on the like curved like underside of some of the object, things like that. So now the other thing that I liked about some of those example illustrations is that a lot of the ones that showed scale, right, like these really big subjects way up in the sky, a lot of them also played around with the effects of atmospheric perspective. So I'm also thinking about, I'm going to grab a little bit of white here actually, and a little bit of this dark blue, cooling off the intensity of some of the object here as it gets farther and farther away from us. So just going to create a very organic patterning of cool tones here. I don't want to lose the that base color that I just put down entirely, but I do want to make it seem like as it gets higher and higher up in the sky, it gets less and less warm, and some of the contrast shifts those are some of the things I'm thinking about here. So we're going to try to cool things off a little bit. When I was working on the drawing, I was really trying to keep this feeling that it's like maybe this is a spirit or a being or some kind of creature that's made up of like really fine particles, with like this misty kind of edge and effect. So I'm going to see if maybe I can experiment a little bit here with some of the shape. This is really important to do when both areas of the painting are still wet, because I can create really soft blends and edges here. Once that yellow dries in the background, it's going to be really hard to achieve this type of transition. So it's one of the things that I love about oil painting, but if you don't have the idea at the right time, you might not be prepared to make those changes and those blends. So, I'm thinking I might as well go through and soften a lot of the other edges here, because I can always paint over this and make some of these edges like really sharp again if I need to, but like I said, it can be a challenge to try to get this type of very like luminous edge otherwise. Okay, I'm going to take a break from this part of the painting and then move to the foreground. I'm still trying to think about value relationships, and one of the things that really stood out in those examples that I was looking at is that a lot of them have really dramatic foregrounds in terms of dark value relationships. So I'm thinking now that maybe I can come in here. I'll mix a little bit of that green with this umber mixture, so it's pretty neutral. So I want this to read like, you know, some sort of organic plant or bush or something. Yeah, this might be a little too much paint, but the same thing over here. Maybe I'll make it a little bit cooler in temperature. But by putting in like the darkest values, that's going to really help me gauge the relationships of value that I should be thinking about in the middle ground, and then the background as well, but especially in the middle ground of the painting. Vary some of the edges here so that it feels more organic, like some kind of a plant. Okay, I'm definitely going to rework some of these shapes probably at some point, but I think for now this is probably okay to move on from. Um, let's see. Something else I kind of want to do at this point is put in the color of the sun, and it makes sense to use this really bright, like butter cream type of color here for that. So let's try that out. If I'm putting in the darkest values, I should probably put in the brightest values as well at this point, which is not far from the color of the paper. So on screen it might not have made that big of a difference, but this is going to help me a lot. Okay, let's think now. So I feel like the landscape could probably be pretty warm. I'm going to try to mix up a bright neutral orange and see if that might work well or read well as the ground plane in the painting. What does this look like? Oh, it's pretty dark. I mean, I could probably use it over here. At this point, I don't really care about being too accurate. I just want to get things blocked in so that I can start to see how everything relates. And then I can start to make more important decisions about, like, well, how chromatic does this part of the painting need to be, or how dark should this area be? It's difficult if you're just putting things together like a puzzle in these separate shapes. At this point, I really need to be focused on the main, full image, so that I have a better idea of the roadmap in front of me and the direction I need to go. But right now, I mean, obviously with that ochre wash that I put on, everything has a very warm tone. And now I'm thinking, well, okay, maybe those areas of contrast are going to be like temperature, and like really try to preserve my cool colors for areas that I want to try to like pop and make a lot more noticeable and vibrant. So that's going to help me with some of the decisions that I have to make. Now I kind of want to take a little bit of orange and a little bit of yellow ochre, maybe a little bit more of this bright color, and create kind of a halo effect around the sun. Just so I can get an idea about the sky. I kind of want to figure out what I'm going to do in the sky still. Take a clean brush and blend this out a little bit. I can scumble this paint around and almost like remove it if I need to, but I just want to soften it so it's not so intense. I think what I might try to do is along the horizon in the sky. I talked about this earlier, but I kind of want to try to make that pretty neutral and more towards the cools, but not like super, super cold compared to the rest of the painting. So we're going to try mixing a few things together here. I want this to be pretty bright, so I'm just grabbing white, a little bit of our brightest value here on our palette. See, that's really dark in comparison to the sky, so I'm thinking, I'm trying to imagine if I had clouds in here. These clouds are pretty dark. I don't want this to become confusing with this creature in the foreground or the middle ground. But I also want to try to figure out my temperature relationship. So I'm just going to run with this still and see what happens if I blend in a little bit more of this color around. I mean, some of this imagery, it's like, it feels like it's kind of epic, but I don't really want the painting to be like over the top epic looking, like super kind of cheesy. I want these to feel alarming, or strange and kind of surreal, but not like Hollywood, level drama. So when I'm thinking about things like clouds and like big shapes like this, it's like I don't really want to do anything that feels over the top. It's like, let's just try to make these look like normal clouds that like you'd see on a normal day, and I think the more normal some of the details can appear, the more convincing and weird and scary and unsettling the unusual stuff starts to feel. I feel like when everything is really over the top and dramatic, it kind of takes away the opportunity for something to feel like possible, and then I think you miss out on some of the power, like the psychological power of painting things like this. So I don't know if I'll be able to do that by the time I'm done with this painting, or if it's going to read that way or work out that way. But in a step like this where I'm thinking about the shapes and the design and like how I want the sky to interact with the ground plane and this like creature thing, I'm going to try my best not to make it too crazy looking or over the top. So technically my horizon line is actually down here. Starting to get a little bit sidetracked, and I started to think that this was my horizon line, but it actually comes down quite a bit further. Now I feel like I'm already going to want to go back over the edge of this shape of like the base of this tornado detail and make it lighter so it pops and it's a lot more dynamic, kind of like the foreground is here. Like a lot of those wiped out areas of the yellow, a lot of those are pretty high contrast moments, so it draws the eye, right? And I might be able to do like some small distant cumulus clouds, right? Those like big billowing clouds. got some birds here. I don't want to forget about those. I think that would make the painting, again, like seem more natural and realistic. A lot of my favorite artwork in Magic, you know, brings in some of that like real world nuance, especially like some of the forest, like big forest creatures where you see like flocks of birds flying around this like giant beast of a creature. You know, without the birds, I feel like you kind of forget like that this is like a ginormous creature, you know? So it helps to have something to really push that sense of scale. I'm thinking probably will lose that edge there. I'm just designing as I go here at this point with the clouds, so things are subject to change. You know, and I'm not looking at any reference material for this. Everything is just coming out of my imagination right now. So I don't know how natural it's going to look. This is where, again, it's like maybe I should be saving reference material and using that to influence what I'm doing, but it's also fun just to paint from my imagination too. Okay, let's see. I don't think this is working very well here. I like the little breaks, but I don't know if one shape is going to really pull it off in that area, so let's just create two smaller ones for now. Again, I'm not using very much paint at this point. This is all pretty thin. It's like a dry brush scumbling effect at this point. So it's a lot easier for me to control things like value, edges, gradients, you know. It's amazing how much like the quantity of paint that we're using is going to affect what we're trying to do. You know, I know some painters really love like tactile, impasto, thick paint application, and I really like painting like that too sometimes, but with this type of a painting, I feel like I really need to be careful about putting too much paint down too early until I start to figure out what I'm looking at, you know, and what some of those big relationships are going to be in the painting. So one thing I'm looking at right now and being nervous about is that cloud shape that I just put in. Like, I don't want that to read like mountains, you know. So I feel like I'm probably going to have to redesign that shape at some point, but I don't want to sit and mess with that a whole lot right now at this point. So instead, I'm going to move to a different area in the painting. All right, I'm going to grab white again and a little bit of this dark blue. So I want to put in some really distant mountains in this painting. So I'm going to start with using a blue for this, but I can already tell that that's not really working. Maybe they should stay warmer, or like this peach pink kind of color. Let's try that. This is where I'm just guessing, you know, it's like maybe I'll try this color. Maybe this will work. Or if I mix this with a little bit of that blue, I can create more of a purple. That might be what I need right here. You know, because I'm like, well, if the sky is mostly warm, maybe the mountains in the distance shouldn't be that cold. feel like that's working right now. But like everything else, we're just going to kind of fill in the whole shape and then see if that base color is reading okay, and then we'll come back and add to it or make adjustments later. But we need to try to get as much of the painting figured out at, you know, for this live stream. Gonna try to keep some of my edges a little bit more loose, so I don't end up with any like sticker shapes, you know, anything that's like really awkwardly sharp. You know, especially with things like mountains in the distance, if they're too crisp and clean, sometimes that can get in the way of reading them as being really far away. So if I can keep more of an organic, varied, soft edge, in theory that should really help convey that distance that I'm after. I'm going to see if maybe a few more little cloud shapes can help. Can help sort of break this big mass, and maybe make things feel more like clouds. I'm still trying to think about my perspective too. Like I want this to feel like a pretty big, vast landscape. So I do need to be mindful of my vanishing point for these clouds. Yeah, I kind of like that. I think that helps create more of a believable sense of space. Maybe I should work on this like little cliff detail on the right side over here. That might be the next phase of the painting here. And honestly, I kind of like the yellow ochre sky. I mean, might be a little too chromatic still, but I think the value of it could work, like the level of darkness that color is. But maybe once I get more of this figured out down here, I can always come back and decide what to do about the sky. All right, let's grab a soft brush here and get some of this figured out. Thinking maybe I can start to use more of my greens now. I don't want to, again, I don't want to go too chromatic. Ooh, that's really dark. I don't want to go with anything too vivid and bright right away. Maybe that's pretty, well, maybe it should be dark actually, right? If it's in the foreground. This is one of those funny things that people will talk about with color theory. Like they'll show their palette and they're mixing a color and it looks really bright or it looks really cold, and then they put it in the painting and it looks really dark and really warm. And the reason that happens, that phenomenon is happening, is because we're changing the context of the color of the paint that we're looking at, you know. And the color that I'm putting in right now in this part of the painting, I'm interpreting its characteristics relative to what is around this color right now, you know. So the color of the sky is much warmer and much brighter, so this feels really, really dark and more neutral and not super warm. You know, but I'm also comparing it to the color of the pencil with this glaze of yellow ochre on top of it. And, you know, sure, there's darker values in some of that, but, you know, these values are a lot lighter than these down here. You know, so when we're painting, we're always making comparisons and relating things to each other. And it's not that the paint is changing on our brush, it's that the environment is changing, right? Because this is the color I just put in, the one I'm pointing to with my brush right now. That's this color over here. But if you look closely, you'll notice like there's just different darker colors next to the pile on the palette. If I cover up that dark blue, you know, then things start to feel a lot less intense in terms of contrast. Let's grab this darker brown. We're going to use this in here. I'm going to cover up some of my drawing, but I took a photograph of the drawing before I mounted it, so I can always refer back to the photo for some of the detail information, because I have these really fun like roots and like curvy organic shapes and lines that I was imagining could be like giving the edge of this cliff rock formation a lot more visual interest. So if I paint over it, I'm gonna forget what it looks like if I would have forgotten to take the picture, which I've done before, and I've learned the hard way. It's like, just document the process as you're going, because you might regret what you do in the painting and want to move backwards. Okay, I'm gonna try to keep some of this sort of soft right now too. And then we're going to grab a little bit of orange and mix it with our brown so it gets lighter. Put that over here, maybe a little bit more yellow ochre and that bright off-white color. You know, again, some of this stuff could change a lot in the next couple of painting sessions. I've definitely had to repaint entire shapes like this because it just didn't work in the painting at a future point in the process. But you have to have something down to be able to know if it's working or not, you know. And I notice that sometimes too with students who are new to painting. You know, it can be intimidating to start out and figure out like, well, what color do I start with, or how do I do this so I don't mess it up? And I've been painting, you know, almost daily for like probably 13, 14 years now, and I still am like, I don't know if this is gonna work, but you just have to try it, and then you can always paint over it. That's the best part. You know, this area too, like when I was drawing this, I didn't love what I ended up with. Like, I like the top half of the cliff. I like the grass. I like this tree. I like the birds off in the distance. I like that the grass can have this like really feathered, sort of textured edge when I get to that point. But I hate the shapes that are down here. Like, this is not working for me. You know, I can't figure out what I need to do. Like, I don't know if it needs something between this cliff and that one, like another bush or tree or something. I mean, I could maybe try that, like another sort of curved shape down here that mimics some of this, you know, those curves, but, or mirrors those. But I don't know what I'm gonna do. I also could just make a larger mass of tree, you know, in front of the cliff, and that kind of gets rid of this awkward, weird contour. Like this, you can tell I made this up because it just looks terrible. It doesn't look natural at all. And I should have probably just like Googled cliff sides or cliff wall and pulled some inspiration from real pictures, but you know, I'm trying to just work from imagination, so these are the problems I'm ending up with. I also think I had more of the green coming down, actually, like over this edge. I just recently finished a commission for some really good friends of ours, and the reference photo was in this really beautiful kind of like vista mountain scene, and there were a lot of these wispy grasses that I got to paint, and it was a small painting, but I still tried to capture some of the texture of the grass, and it had like these really beautiful rolling hills where, with perspective and distance and space, you know, the color properties were changing in the grass, but in the foreground I really tried to convey the texture and like that density of line, you know, and I kind of want to do that in this painting too when I get to that part of the process, but that's going to be hours and hours and hours away from now, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. So this tree up here can be pretty sharp because it's pretty close to the foreground. I'm not going to try to do too soft of an edge on that. Soft enough where it feels organic, but not like where, like, you know, you can't really read where it ends. A little bit of the blue. Maybe I should bring another tree top over here. Actually, I think that was good. That really makes it seem more natural, actually. Okay, so now this shape, if you've been wondering, is the shadow from this big creature thing. You know, if the sun is behind the creature, then it's being backlit, right? So I need to think about its cast shadow on the landscape. And that's another part of the drawing where I'm like, I don't know if it's working very well, but you need to, again, you kind of have to put something in to decide if it needs to change or if it's effective. This is probably way too dark, but I'm just going to put a very thin amount of paint down to start out with. Gently blocking this in. We can warm up the shadow a little bit as we get closer to the foreground too. This is one of my favorite things to do when I'm painting in plein air, is really play with the temperature inside of shadows and have them get a lot warmer as they get closer to the foreground of the painting. Maybe not a lot warmer, but enough of a shift where it helps convey that sense of perspective in space. Can keep this edge pretty soft as well, because I'm going to want to convey some of the texture in the landscape. Actually, I should probably keep the edge of this pretty soft, even as it narrows, because this is, like I said, kind of a tornado shape. So I feel like if a tornado was backlit and it was casting a shadow, it would probably have a pretty soft and organic edge to its shadow. This kind of has a little bit of a, like, you know, sort of like, I don't know, gravitational pull, explosion sort of effect happening. What's weird is that everything is being pulled towards the object as opposed to being blown away from that point. So, you know, hopefully it doesn't feel too violent either. I don't think it will. I feel like, especially with these like whimsical trees in the right side there, I don't think it's going to be too I don't know, frightening looking. Alright, I want to erase out a little bit of this here. Just so we can see that shadow. I don't want it to read like the rim light on this plant, so I'm going to push this out just a little bit. And I can soften it again. I'm excited to work on this painting, this panel for the painting, because in the last one I screwed up the matte medium in a few spots, and I didn't glue the paper down flat enough, so I had air bubbles in some areas, and it just felt, the whole time I kept working on the painting, it just felt very frustrating because the quality of the surface wasn't really what I wanted. And this one is very smooth, there's no bubbles anywhere, and the matte medium was applied in a very even coat between the two coats. So it's nice not to have to feel that frustration of wishing I had gone slower and been more careful with the materials before I even start the painting. And I usually make all of my own panels these days and surfaces, so when it doesn't work out, it just feels, you just kind of feel bad and frustrated. Because on the one hand, it's nice to be able to make your own stuff and to have full control over the surface quality of a panel, and just to know what you're working with in terms of quality. But then on the other hand, if it turns out really poorly, you can't really blame anybody else. You just have to be more careful next time, which was the lesson I learned. And the worst part was with the last painting in that panel is that the areas where the matte medium got really textured and kind of screwed up were really close to, if not in the same spot as the like focal areas, you know. So then it's like I kept looking at that part of the painting over and over and over, and you know, kind of like wanting to address the details there, but then getting distracted by the texture, because the texture was accidental. It wasn't like, you know, there to help convey the information. So if you're making your own panels and you're gessoing things, or you're using matte medium, I cannot stress enough how important it is to really take your time. You know, I suppose I could have maybe sanded the matte medium and done another like few coats, but then I run the risk of like sanding into the paper and losing my drawing that's underneath the matte medium. So I just thought, you know what, I'll just paint over it, and maybe by some, you know, like coincidence, like that part of the panel will just need a lot of texture, and then you won't even notice. That was kind of my backup plan. Like I was like, maybe I can still, you know, hide that part of the surface, but that never happened. So all of that to say, I feel very at ease so far on this painting, just because of the fact that the panel is nice and smooth. So obviously I'm trying to address some of the values of this like tornado spiral at the base of the creature there, which might be a little too dark now that I'm stepping back. But I also want to try to figure out like what the color is going to be in this like mass, atmospheric, chaotic spot down here. I'm thinking maybe that should be like the warmest, most like chromatic part of the painting. So I'm gonna try actually a little bit of green and orange together and see how that looks. Grab some of my medium. We're just gonna blend some of this warm color into our little tornado base down here. I kind of like the idea of this being really warm, because the rest of the landscape is going to be hopefully a little bit more neutral, and it kind of forces us to wonder like, well, what's creating all of this warm color, you know, in this tornado moment. And maybe that question becomes the point of the painting. You know, it's like we're seeing the destruction of something, but we don't even know what the thing is, and we know that it's different than everything else because the color is different than everything else. think I can probably darken this part of the landscape a little bit. So I'm being mindful about painting over some of these trees down here because, you know, I think their level of contrast can definitely be compressed a little bit, but the trees that are closer to us, I don't want to paint over entirely because I'll probably introduce a bit more color into those or sharpen their edges. I'm realizing my shadow for this tornado might be off. Shadow is going to need quite a bit of work, I think. It's not really working very well. It seems too dark. This is where I use too much paint, you know, now it's just getting really muddy and harder to draw with. So I'm just going to make more of a big cloudy mass, and then I can paint over this and redraw with the color of the ground instead of the shadow. You know, or sometimes, every now and again, it's like I soften it and then I actually like how that looks, so I don't change it at all and I can just keep it. But I don't think that's going to happen here. I wonder too if maybe the shadow could be a little bit, I don't know, a bit thinner. It's kind of funny because I feel like this painting hasn't changed a whole lot in the time that I've been working on it, because the sky is basically the same and a lot of the paint is so thin, it's like everything's moving very slowly, but I kind of have to work really slowly because I don't really know what I'm trying to do in this painting. almost want to just make this edge go straight, like almost straight down as a cliffside, but I'm not going to do that right now. Because that would be a lot to clean up if it doesn't work. What I do want to try to do though is take out some of this shadow. Oops. Take out some of this shadow here. I think that shape reads a bit better, although I feel like because the value of the shadow is so dark, I'm going to have to probably let it dry and then glaze over it to make it seem less intense, which that's okay. I don't mind doing that, but that means I'll have to stop working on it for a day or two. But I should probably soften the shadow at least. Again, this way I don't have that like sticker effect where it's super sharp on the boundary. Okay. Hitting this point where it's like, well, most things have a base layer of paint, and now I need to figure out, like, I think actually what I might do is just go back into this creature area and push that a little bit more, since I don't really know what to do with the landscape at this point, so I'm gonna just move my focus onto this. I think I'm going to try going over some of my line work and draw back some of the invented anatomy of this thing. Kind of reminds me of like an octopus or a squid or something like that. Now, the other thing I was just thinking about a few minutes ago is that if the sun is behind this, that a lot of this is basically backlit then, and typically that means a lot of the contrast is pretty compressed and it's fairly low in value. So I think I'm going to try darkening some of the creature here hopefully as a way of conveying that it's being backlit. Don't know how well this is going to work, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay, that looks pretty good so far. Sometimes I feel like with things that are backlit like this too, I can just keep a slightly darker value along the edge of the form. And then once I figure out what I'm doing with the sky, I can come back with a lighter kind of glowing color, and in a few areas maybe paint like a little bit of a contrast of the glow. Let's see. I think I might paint for another 15 minutes or so and then probably end the stream for tonight. Or at least take a break. I might come back. after dinner and keep painting for a bit. We'll see. let's see. I think I can probably take a break. Where are we at? 2.5 hours? It's probably a good time to stop. If you've been hanging out for most of the stream and or you're watching this as a recording, thanks for following along and checking out the process for this painting. I don't know if I'll go live again tonight. I might not. I don't know. I might just save the next few steps for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But I'm pretty happy with where this is at currently. I think there's a lot that I still have to play around with in terms of color and values and, you know, how to create a bit more emphasis on the focal areas. But I think that this is a pretty good start on most of the painting. You know, I one of the things that I think is awkward is that, like, all of these trees are being pulled towards this center creature situation, but these two bushes are just sort of static. You know, I think maybe there needs to be a bit more of a sense of expression, or like this pulling sensation. So maybe before I end, I'll just try that out real quick and see if I like how it looks. And the creature, subject definitely changed quite a bit too. I mean, starting to see it more like this bird type of creature now, which is different, but I don't mind how it looks at the moment. I think it's going to keep changing a little bit more, but I think it needed to be a little bit more pointed on that side. I think it works well with this curve over here. Honestly, I wonder if maybe it was a mistake to even put these two, kind of shrub things in here. Maybe I should have just made them look more like these trees that I have. So I'm wondering if I might prefer just mimicking some of the shapes in the trees. This early in the painting process, I think it's okay to redraw and experiment with some of these things before I get too committed to the surrounding areas. But yeah, let's see if this feels better. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll wait. Maybe I'll just kind of look at it for a while, or take a picture of it and work on it on my phone or my iPad and see if I can come up with something better. I just think the foreground needs to be interesting. It needs something more visually impactful. Like, I think this is an awkward amount of space between these two shapes. It's like this is the same distance as this, which is almost the same distance as this. I think that's part of the reason why I don't like the foreground. Like, there's a lot of equal, areas of pacing. And I think, like I said, this kind of like static geometric shape is just, it's not really working for me right now. So I think that's going to have to change too. But maybe I should just leave it alone for now and let it dry and then paint over it. This bird head thing is pretty weird, but I kind of like it. Okay, I think this is where I'm going to stop. So thank you so much for watching and for supporting my work. If you're not familiar with my artwork, I hope you'll check out my website. If you have any questions or comments about this painting that's in progress, feel free to share those with me. I'll keep an eye on the comments after this is published. I'm going to take a break, I think, for tonight, and one thing I'll have to do is scoop up and save some of this paint on another palette, and then that way I have the same color palette next time I work on this. But yeah, I think that's it for tonight. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next live stream. Take care, everyone, and yeah.